My name is Trevor Matthews, 32, a software engineer from Boston, and I never thought I'd be telling the story of how I ended my marriage at my own wedding reception. 4 years ago, I met Kyle, and she seemed perfect, until our wedding day revealed who she truly was. When she handed the cake-cutting knife to her twin brother Kevin instead of sharing that moment with me, something inside me snapped. I knew right then I couldn't spend my life as an outsider in my own marriage. Where are you watching from? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to make a tough decision that changed everything. Before I met Kyle, my life was what most would call successful but incomplete. At 28, I had established myself as a senior software engineer at a respected tech company in Boston. My career was thriving. I'd just led a major project that earned me a substantial promotion. My apartment overlooked the Charles River, and financially, I had nothing to complain about. But coming home to an empty apartment night after night made me realize success means little when you have no one to share it with. My friends had paired off one by one, and I found myself being the perpetual third wheel at dinners or the single guy at parties. Dating apps led to a string of awkward first dates that rarely progressed to seconds. I wasn't desperate, but I was ready to find someone special. Then came that Saturday night in October when my college roommate Mark insisted I attend his birthday party. "You work too much, Trevor. One night out won't kill you," he said. Reluctantly, I agreed. That decision changed everything. The party was at an upscale bar downtown. I arrived late, having lost track of time debugging code. The place was packed, but even across the crowded room, I noticed her immediately. Kyle was laughing at something someone said, her head tilted back slightly, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. There was something magnetic about her presence, a kind of effortless confidence that drew me in. Mark noticed me staring and grinned. "That's Kyle. She works with my wife at the hospital. She's a pediatric nurse. Want an introduction?" Before I could respond, he was already leading me across the room. "Kyle, this is Trevor, my old college buddy I was telling you about." Our eyes met, and the connection was instant. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "The computer genius, right? Mark won't shut up about how you're the next Steve Jobs." I laughed, immediately comfortable. "Mark exaggerates. I just write code that mostly works." We talked for hours that night, finding a quiet corner while the party continued around us. Kyle was intelligent, witty, and passionately dedicated to her young patients. She told animated stories about the children she cared for, her eyes lighting up when describing how a particularly shy 5-year-old had finally trusted her enough to hold her hand during a procedure. Our first date was the following weekend, a hike through the Blue Hills Reservation south of Boston. Kyle arrived with a perfectly packed backpack containing not just water and snacks, but a small first aid kit. Nurse habits die hard, and even a tiny sketchbook to press wildflowers. Her spontaneity and attention to detail fascinated me. When a sudden rainstorm caught us halfway up the trail, instead of rushing back to the car, she pulled me into a dance in the rain, laughing as we got soaked. "Life's too short to run from a little water," she said, her face tilted toward the sky. That day set the tone for our relationship, adventurous, fun, and seemingly perfectly balanced. Kyle pushed me out of my comfort zone in the best ways. She convinced me to try rock climbing, taught me to make pasta from scratch, and introduced me to her love of impromptu road trips to nowhere in particular. Meanwhile, I brought stability, thoughtful planning, and quiet evenings that she claimed helped ground her whirlwind mind. It was 3 months into dating when I first met Kyle's family at her parents' home in Lexington. Her father Robert was a retired high school principal, reserved but welcoming. Her mother Diana was a real estate agent with a forceful personality who immediately began questioning me about my long-term intentions. But it was Kyle's twin brother Kevin who stood out most. The moment we arrived, Kevin rushed to the door and swept Kyle into a bear hug, lifting her off the ground as though they hadn't seen each other in years rather than days. "There's my better half," he exclaimed, barely acknowledging my presence until Kyle physically pulled away to introduce me. Throughout dinner, I noticed how Kyle constantly sought Kevin's approval, checking his reaction to her stories, asking his opinion on everything from her new haircut to her career decisions. When I mentioned our recent trip to Vermont, Kyle immediately said, "I told Kevin all about it. He thinks we should try New Hampshire next time. He knows a great cabin we could rent." I remember thinking it was slightly odd that she'd discussed our private getaway with her brother in such detail, but I dismissed it. Close siblings were a good thing, right? My own brother lived on the West Coast, and I sometimes wished we were closer. That night as we drove home, Kyle spent 20 minutes on the phone with Kevin, recapping the dinner we just left. When she finally hung up, she sighed contentedly. "Isn't Kevin great? We've been inseparable since we were kids. He's the other half of me, you know?" Looking back, that was the first red flag I should have heeded. But I was already falling in love, and it's amazing what we can rationalize when our hearts are involved. As our relationship progressed, Kevin's presence grew increasingly prominent. Kyle would cancel our plans if Kevin needed her for something. She consulted him before making any significant decision. When we discussed moving in together after a year of dating, Kyle's first concern was whether it would put too much distance between her and Kevin, who lived just 10 minutes from her apartment. The day we signed the lease on our new place, Kyle insisted on having Kevin come along. While I discussed terms with the property manager, they wandered through the rooms together, with Kevin declaring certain spaces not quite right, and suggesting renovations. When I gently pointed out that it was our apartment, not his, Kyle seemed genuinely confused. "But Kevin has such a good eye for these things. And he'll be over all the time anyway." That prediction proved all too accurate. In our first month living together, Kevin showed up unannounced at least twice a week, sometimes with dinner or a movie, other times just to hang out. He had a key. Kyle had given it to him without discussing it with me, and occasionally I'd come home from work to find him already there, feet up on our coffee table, waiting for Kyle to return from her shift. Despite these warning signs, there was so much good in our relationship that I continued to make excuses. Kyle was loving, supportive of my career, and brought joy and spontaneity into my structured life. When it was just the two of us, things were nearly perfect. I told myself the Kevin situation would improve with time, that as Kyle and I grew closer, her dependence on her twin would naturally diminish. Instead, the opposite happened. The more serious our relationship became, the more Kyle seemed to cling to her twin. It was as though she was trying to maintain the primacy of one relationship while building another, never quite understanding that something would eventually have to give. After 2 years together, I was certain Kyle was the woman I wanted to spend my life with. Despite the complications with Kevin, our relationship had deepened in meaningful ways. We developed our own traditions, inside jokes, and a rhythm to our life together that felt right. I began planning a proposal that would be both romantic and memorable. I arranged a trip to Hawaii, something Kyle had always dreamed of, and selected a stunning princess-cut diamond ring that I knew she would love. On our third evening there, I suggested a sunset walk along the beach. As the sky exploded into shades of orange and pink, I dropped to one knee on the black sand beach and asked Kyle to marry me. Her reaction was everything I'd hoped for: tears of joy, emphatic yes, and a passionate kiss that felt like a promise. For 15 perfect minutes, it was just the two of us, wrapped in our private bubble of happiness, as I slipped the ring onto her finger. Then Kyle pulled out her phone. "I have to call Kevin right away. He's been helping me pick out wedding dresses online for months, just in case. He's going to freak out." My heart sank slightly. Not her parents first, not even a moment to savor the engagement ourselves. Kevin had to be the first to know. I watched as she paced excitedly along the shore, describing every detail of the proposal to her brother while I sat alone on the sand. The romantic moment effectively ended. When she finally returned, bubbling with excitement, she announced, "Kevin says we should aim for a fall wedding. Next October would be perfect. And he thinks we should consider the Riverside Gardens venue since they have that gorgeous willow tree for photos." I blinked in surprise. "We just got engaged 30 minutes ago." Maybe we should discuss these things together before involving others? Kyle looked genuinely confused. But Kevin knows exactly what I've always wanted. He's been helping me plan my wedding since we were kids. That comment should have been my cue to have a serious conversation about boundaries, but surrounded by the beauty of Hawaii and not wanting to dampen her joy, I simply smiled and suggested we enjoy our engagement for the evening before diving into planning. That night set the pattern for what followed. What should have been our wedding planning process quickly became the Kyle and Kevin show, with me cast in an increasingly minor role. Upon returning home, Kyle immediately scheduled a preliminary planning brunch that included her parents, Kevin, and Kevin's girlfriend Madison. My parents, who lived just an hour away, weren't invited because Kyle thought it was too early to involve extended family. When I pointed out that her family was already deeply involved, she replied, "That's different. They know what I like." As weeks passed, the wedding planning consumed our lives, but rarely in ways that involved my input. Diana, Kyle's mother, took control of vendor selections, while Kevin appointed himself chief decision-maker on everything from the venue to the table settings. My suggestions were routinely dismissed or overruled. Navy blue for the groomsmen? No, Kevin thinks burgundy would be better with the fall theme. That band sounds too rock-oriented. Kevin found this jazz quartet that would be perfect. Your guest list is too long. Kevin thinks we should keep it more intimate. My parents noticed the pattern during our first joint family dinner to discuss the wedding. After witnessing Kevin override my preference for the meal service style, my mother pulled me aside. "Trevor, honey, is this how all the planning has been going? Because I haven't heard you make a single decision tonight." I admitted things had been challenging. My father, never one to mince words, was more direct. "Son, it's your wedding too. If you're getting steamrolled now, what does that say about your marriage?" His question haunted me. That night, I attempted to have a serious conversation with Kyle about feeling excluded from our own wedding planning. "I feel like my opinions don't matter," I told her as we got ready for bed. "Everything gets filtered through Kevin for approval." Kyle's eyes welled with tears. "That's not fair. Kevin just wants the best for us. He knows me better than anyone." "Better than me?" I asked quietly. "That's different," she insisted. "He's known me my whole life. But I promise things will get better after the wedding. Once we're married, everything will fall into place." I wanted to believe her. And in some ways, the promise of post-wedding improvement kept me going through increasingly difficult planning sessions. One major conflict arose over the best man selection. Naturally, I wanted my brother Ryan to stand beside me. Though we weren't as close as Kyle and Kevin, Ryan had always been my role model and supporter. But Kyle had other ideas. "I think Kevin should be your best man," she suggested one evening. "That way we can keep the symmetry. I'll have Madison as my maid of honor, and you'll have Kevin." I was genuinely shocked. "Kyle, that makes no sense. Kevin is your brother, not mine. Ryan has been my best friend my entire life." This led to our first major fight about the wedding. Kyle couldn't understand why I wouldn't want her beloved twin standing beside me, while I couldn't comprehend how she failed to see the inappropriateness of her suggestion. Eventually, we compromised. Ryan would be my best man, but Kevin would give a special toast during the reception. I thought this was more than fair, but Kyle remained disappointed, bringing it up repeatedly in the weeks that followed. The engagement party, bridal shower, and bachelor/bachelorette parties all followed the same pattern, Kevin at the center, orchestrating events and inserting himself into every tradition. My bachelor party, which should have been planned by Ryan, was hijacked by Kevin, who insisted on joining what should have been a guy's weekend and redirecting the activities to his preferences. Throughout these pre-wedding events, I noticed how Kevin always managed to pull focus, telling childhood stories that emphasized his special bond with Kyle while subtly positioning me as an outsider. At the rehearsal dinner, he gave an impromptu speech about how no one would ever understand Kyle the way he did, but he was willing to share her with me. Guests laughed uncomfortably while I sat there, increasingly certain that something was fundamentally wrong with the dynamic. The night before our wedding, tradition suggested we spend separately, the last night before beginning our life together. I had anticipated a quiet evening with Ryan and my closest friends, perhaps reflecting on this major life transition. Instead, Kyle informed me that she would be staying at her parents' house with Kevin and the rest of her family. "We're going to look through old photo albums and stuff. Family tradition," she explained. There was no invitation for me to join, no acknowledgement that I was about to become family too. As I kissed her goodbye outside her parents' house, Kevin appeared in the doorway. "Don't worry, Trevor. I'll take good care of her tonight." The statement, which should have been innocuous, carried an undertone that left me uneasy as I drove back to our empty apartment. Alone on the eve of my wedding, I found myself wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. I woke up alone in our apartment on what should have been the happiest day of my life. Sunlight streamed through the blinds I'd forgotten to close, and for a moment, just a moment, everything felt normal and peaceful. Then reality crashed in. I was getting married today, and the knot in my stomach wasn't just pre-wedding jitters. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Big day, little brother! Be there in 30 with coffee and bagels." At least someone was looking out for me. Kyle had barely communicated since I'd dropped her off at her parents' house. Her only message, sent late last night, was a brief, "Can't wait to see you at the altar." No terms of endearment, no excitement or personal touch. It felt like a text you'd send a casual acquaintance. I sent her a more heartfelt message. "Good morning, beautiful. Can't believe in a few hours you'll be my wife. I love you so much." 20 minutes passed before her reply. "Morning. Super busy with hair and makeup. Kevin's helping coordinate everyone. See you soon." Even on our wedding day, Kevin was the central figure in her message. Ryan arrived with breakfast and a supportive clap on the shoulder. "You ready for this?" "As I'll ever be," I replied, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. By the time my other groomsmen arrived, we'd established a light-hearted atmosphere, sharing stories and jokes as we got dressed in our tuxedos. For a while, I relaxed, catching glimpses of the joy this day should have brought. That changed when there was an unexpected knock at the door. Ryan opened it to reveal Kevin, already fully dressed in his groomsman attire, a too-wide smile on his face. "Thought I'd check on the groom. Make sure everything's running smoothly on this side." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. My friends, aware of the situation from various pre-wedding events, exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We're all good here," Ryan said firmly. "Trevor's got plenty of support." Kevin ignored him, walking straight to me and adjusting my already perfectly positioned tie. "Kyle wanted me to make sure you were doing everything right. Can't have you looking anything less than perfect for my sister." I stepped back, reclaiming my personal space. "I appreciate the concern, but we've got this handled." "Just trying to help," Kevin said with a shrug. "Kyle's dress looks amazing, by the way. I helped her pick it out, you know. I know exactly what styles flatter her figure." The comment, with its slightly inappropriate intimacy, hung awkwardly in the air. My best friend Alex cleared his throat loudly. "Hey Kevin, doesn't the bride need you more right now? Wedding day and all that?" Kevin checked his watch. "Probably right. Oh, by the way, Trevor, Mom decided to change the ceremony music. She thought your selections were a bit too modern. Hope that's cool." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving behind a trail of tension and a bombshell about yet another decision made without my input. "Dude," Alex said once the door closed. "That guy is something else." Ryan placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's not too late, you know. If you're having doubts." "I love Kyle," I said automatically, the response worn smooth like a river stone from repetition. "Loving someone doesn't mean you have to accept a package deal," Ryan replied quietly. I pushed the thought away. We were hours from the ceremony. Everything was in motion. Hundreds of guests would be arriving soon. It was too late for second thoughts. At the venue, a beautiful garden estate with a glass-enclosed reception hall, I watched guests filter in while hiding in a side room with my groomsmen. My parents found me before the ceremony, my mother fussing with my boutonniere while my father stood by, uncharacteristically quiet. "You look so handsome," Mom said, her eyes already teary. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" The directness of her question caught me off guard. "Of course," I said too quickly. Dad finally spoke. "It's still your day, son. Don't let anyone take that from you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. They knew. Of course they knew. They'd watched from the sidelines as I was increasingly marginalized in my own engagement. Minutes before the ceremony was to begin, the wedding coordinator appeared with a frazzled expression. "There's been a slight change to the processional order. The bride's mother wants Kevin to walk in just before the bride, after the other groomsmen." "That's not the order we rehearsed," I protested. "I know, I'm sorry. They were quite insistent. Mrs. Lawson said it's a family tradition for the twin to have a special place in the ceremony." Another tradition I'd never heard of until this moment. I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. "Fine. Whatever makes everyone happy." Ryan muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, "Everyone except you." As I took my position at the altar, waiting for the procession to begin, I caught whispers from the front row where Kyle's extended family sat. Her aunt leaned toward a cousin. "Diana says they've already found a house just 2 streets over from Kevin." She made sure of it. This was news to me. We'd casually discussed house hunting after the honeymoon, but no decisions had been made, certainly none about living near Kevin. The revelation sent a chill through me even as the music began and the procession started. The bridesmaids and groomsmen walked in pairs, followed by Ryan. Then, breaking tradition, Kevin entered alone, walking slowly down the aisle as though he were the main attraction, nodding and smiling at guests. He took his place not with the other groomsmen, but in a special position slightly apart, creating an asymmetry in the carefully planned altar arrangement. When Kyle finally appeared on her father's arm, she was breathtaking. Her dress, apparently Kevin approved, was indeed stunning, a classic A-line with delicate lace detailing that perfectly suited her. For a moment, seeing her, all my doubts faded. This was why I was here. This was what mattered. But as she approached, her eyes darted not to me, but to Kevin, seeking his reaction first. Only after her twin gave an approving nod did she turn her smile to me. That single glance reignited every doubt I'd tried to suppress. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way that carefully orchestrated events usually are. The garden setting was picture perfect, with late afternoon sunlight filtering through ancient oak trees. Flower arrangements, selected by Kevin and Diana, of course, flanked the altar in elegant cascades of burgundy and cream. Everything looked like a wedding should. But standing there, holding Kyle's hands as the officiant spoke about unity and partnership, I felt strangely disconnected, as though watching someone else's wedding. Kyle looked radiant, but her smiles seemed performed, her responses rehearsed. When it came time for our personally written vows, hers were beautiful but generic, containing none of the private jokes or meaningful references I'd included in mine. Most tellingly, during the ring exchange, as I placed the band on her finger with deeply felt words about my commitment, her eyes drifted past my shoulder, to Kevin. Even in this most intimate moment, she was checking for her twin's approval. Despite these undercurrents, we were pronounced husband and wife. Our first kiss as a married couple was brief and chaste. "Kevin thinks excessive PDA is tacky," Kyle had warned me during wedding planning. As we turned to face our guests, applause erupted, and for a brief, shining moment, I felt a surge of hope. We were married now. Surely things would change. That hope began to crumble during the post-ceremony photos. The photographer, trying to organize family groupings, asked for a photo of just the bride and groom. "Wait," Kyle said. "We need Kevin in this one too." What followed was an uncomfortable negotiation where the photographer tried to explain standard wedding photo protocol, while Kyle insisted her twin be included in nearly every shot. Eventually, I pulled the photographer aside and told him to just go with it. The resulting awkward arrangement had Kevin standing beside Kyle while I stood on her other side, the three of us looking more like an odd throuple than a traditional wedding party. By the time we entered the reception, my jaw ached from forcing smiles. The introduction as Mr. and Mrs. Matthews should have been a highlight, but even this was altered at the last minute to include, and the bride's twin brother, Kevin Lawson, at Diana's insistence. We walked into the reception hall as a trio, not a couple, with guests looking confused but politely applauding. Our first dance began normally enough. For 30 seconds, I held Kyle close as we swayed to our chosen song, one of the few selections I'd managed to maintain against Kevin's alternative suggestions. But halfway through, Kyle's father cut in, as is sometimes traditional. This was followed, non-traditionally, by Kevin cutting in to finish the dance with his sister, leaving me standing awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor, watching my new wife twirl in her brother's arms. "That was weird, right?" Alex muttered, appearing beside me with a much-needed glass of whiskey. "I'm not just imagining it. Apparently it's another family tradition," I said, accepting the drink gratefully. The reception continued with more of the same. Kyle spent more time at the head table talking with Kevin and her parents than circulating with me to greet our guests. When we did make rounds together, she frequently cut conversations short, particularly with my college friends and colleagues, to return to her family's orbit. Kevin's best man speech, which he insisted on giving despite not being the best man, was the most uncomfortable 15 minutes of the evening. What should have been a brief toast became an extended monologue about his and Kyle's childhood, their special twin bond, and various inside jokes that left most guests shifting uneasily in their seats. He mentioned me exactly twice, once to say I seemed like a good guy, and once to admonish me to take care of his other half. Ryan's actual best man speech that followed was warm, inclusive, and mercifully brief, clearly attempting to redirect the focus to Kyle and me as a couple. Kyle barely paid attention, whispering with Kevin throughout. As dinner concluded and the dancing began in earnest, I found myself increasingly isolated. Kyle was constantly surrounded by her family members, while I made obligatory conversation with distant relatives and colleagues. During a rare moment when I managed to pull her onto the dance floor, she seemed distracted. "Are you having a good time?" I asked, trying to connect with my new wife. "It's perfect," she replied, but her eyes scanned the room. "Have you seen Kevin? He was supposed to coordinate with the DJ about the special song we used to dance to as kids." "Kyle," I said gently, "it's our wedding. Maybe we could focus on our songs, our moments right now." She looked at me with genuine confusion. "But this is important too. It's been planned for ages." Before I could respond, she spotted Kevin and waved him over, effectively ending our private moment. Throughout the evening, I made multiple attempts to enjoy what was supposed to be our celebration. Each time, Kyle was pulled away by her mother, father, or inevitably Kevin. It was during one such abandoned moment that I found myself near the gift table, inadvertently overhearing a conversation never meant for my ears. Diana and Kevin stood partially concealed by a decorative pillar, heads close together in serious discussion. "The house on Maple Street is still available," Diana was saying. "I can make sure their offer is accepted. It's only 8 minutes from yours." "Perfect," Kevin replied. "We need to make sure she doesn't get pulled into his idea of moving downtown. Kyle belongs in the neighborhood with family." "Of course," Diana agreed. "We've always known she can't be too far from you. You two need each other. Trevor will just have to understand that's how it is in our family. He seems adaptable enough," Kevin said with a dismissive chuckle. "As long as he knows his place in the hierarchy." Their words hit me like physical blows. Not only were they actively planning our living situation without any input from me, but they were explicitly establishing that I would always be secondary in my own marriage, that my role was to adapt and accept a subordinate place in Kyle's life. In that moment, something crystallized within me. The vague discomfort and collection of red flags suddenly formed a clear, undeniable pattern. This wasn't just about an overly involved family or wedding day stress. This was my future being mapped out, with me cast as little more than a supporting character. As I stood there, processing this revelation, Kyle appeared at my elbow. "There you are! It's almost time for the cake cutting. Mom says we should do it now before some of the older guests leave." I looked at my wife, this woman I had promised to spend my life with just hours ago, and wondered if she even saw me at all. "Sure," I said quietly. "Let's cut the cake." The 5-tier wedding cake stood in all its glory near the dance floor, a masterpiece of white fondant with cascading sugar flowers in burgundy and blush pink. It was one of the few wedding elements Kyle and I had chosen together without interference. We'd spent a delightful afternoon at the bakery, sampling flavors and discussing designs, one of those rare planning moments that felt like it was truly about us. The DJ announced the cake cutting, his voice booming across the reception hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please gather around. It's time for the newlyweds to cut their wedding cake." Guests began migrating toward the cake display, phones ready to capture the traditional moment. I took my position beside the cake, waiting for Kyle to join me. The knife and server were laid out on a decorative table, along with the special cake plates we'd selected together. Kyle approached, looking beautiful but oddly nervous. I reached for her hand, ready to share this moment, but noticed she was looking past me. Following her gaze, I saw Kevin making his way through the crowd with purpose, straightening his tie as he moved. When Kyle reached me, Kevin was right behind her, standing uncomfortably close. I picked up the cake knife and offered it to Kyle so we could hold it together, the traditional pose for this moment. Instead of taking it, Kyle stepped slightly back. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet as guests waited expectantly, "Kevin should do this." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "What?" Kyle took the knife from my stunned hand and held it out to Kevin, who stepped forward with a triumphant smile. "It's a family tradition," she explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "The twin always cuts the first slice at weddings." The absurdity of the statement momentarily rendered me speechless. Around us, guests exchanged confused glances. From the corner of my eye, I saw my parents' matching expressions of disbelief. "Kyle," I finally managed, keeping my voice low despite my rising anger, "there is no such tradition. And even if there were, this is our wedding cake. Ours. As in you and me, the people who just got married." Kevin, knife now in hand, spoke as though explaining something to a child. "Trevor, there are some family traditions you just wouldn't understand. Kyle and I have always shared these special moments. But this isn't a birthday party," I said, struggling to maintain composure. "This is my wedding. Our wedding." I turned to Kyle, desperately seeking some recognition of how inappropriate this was. "Kyle, please. This is our moment." She fidgeted with her bouquet, looking uncomfortable with the confrontation but not with the situation that caused it. "It's not a big deal, Trevor. Kevin and I have always done special moments together. You can still eat the cake with me after he cuts it." Something about her phrasing, that I could still participate after Kevin had taken the central role, struck a nerve. This wasn't just about cake. This was emblematic of everything wrong with our relationship. "Not a big deal?" I repeated, no longer bothering to keep my voice down. "My own wife is handing our wedding cake knife to her brother instead of sharing that moment with me, and it's not a big deal?" Murmurs rippled through the gathered guests. Kyle's mother stepped forward, her tone placating but condescending. "Trevor, dear, you're making a scene. Just let Kevin do this one little thing, and we can all move on." "One little thing?" I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "This hasn't been about one little thing from the beginning. This entire wedding, our entire relationship, has been about accommodating Kyle and Kevin's bizarre codependence while I'm pushed to the sidelines." Kevin's face darkened. "You're overreacting. Kyle, tell him he's overreacting." Kyle looked trapped between us, her expression panicked. She reached for my hand. "Trevor, please. Let's just do it Kevin's way and enjoy the rest of our reception." I pulled my hand away. That's the problem right there. It's always Kevin's way. Where exactly do I fit into this marriage, Kyle? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm expected to be okay with being the third wheel in my own relationship. Kyle's eyes filled with tears, but her next words confirmed every fear I'd been trying to ignore. You need to understand that Kevin will always be the most important man in my life. We share a bond you can't possibly comprehend. I thought you accepted that when you proposed. The reception hall had gone completely silent. Even the DJ had stopped the background music, leaving Kyle's declaration hanging nakedly in the air for everyone to hear. The rawness of her admission, that I would always come second to her twin, hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, with crystal clarity, I knew I couldn't do this. Not for another minute, let alone a lifetime. You're right, I said quietly. I can't comprehend it. And I won't live with it. I turned to face our guests, many of whom looked mortified on my behalf. I want to thank everyone for coming today, but I'm afraid there's been a mistake. I just realized I can't be married to someone who will always put me second. Gasps and whispers erupted. Kyle grabbed my arm. Trevor! What are you saying? I gently removed her hand. I'm saying the marriage is over, Kyle. It was over before it began. I slipped my wedding ring off and placed it on the cake table. I deserve to be someone's first choice, not an afterthought. Kevin stepped forward aggressively. You can't do this to her. You're embarrassing her in front of everyone. No, Kevin, I replied calmly. You both did this. I was just too blind to see it until now. I looked at Kyle one last time. Her expression wasn't of heartbreak, but of indignation and shock, the look of someone whose carefully constructed plan had unexpectedly fallen apart. I hope you and Kevin have a wonderful life together, I said. You clearly don't need anyone else. Without waiting for a response, I walked away from the cake, through the stunned crowd, and out the reception hall doors. Behind me, chaos erupted, Kyle's sobs, Kevin's angry shouts, and the buzz of 300 guests witnessing the spectacular implosion of a marriage that had lasted less than 6 hours. As the heavy doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the noise, I felt something unexpected, not sadness or regret, but relief. For the first time since I'd proposed, I could breathe freely. I drove away from the venue in my tuxedo, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The evening air rushing through the open windows gradually cleared my head as I put distance between myself and the wedding disaster. Street by street, mile by mile, the surreal quality of what had just happened began to sink in. I had walked out on my own wedding reception. The marriage I'd spent months planning and years building toward had combusted in spectacular fashion in front of everyone we knew. My phone erupted with notifications, texts, calls, voicemails pouring in from concerned friends and family. I silenced it without looking and kept driving. Eventually, I found myself at a hotel downtown, as far from our apartment as I could reasonably get while still being in Boston. The night clerk raised an eyebrow at my formal attire but asked no questions as I checked in under my name alone. The hotel room was sterile and anonymous, exactly what I needed. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my tuxedo, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the evening. To my surprise, instead of collapse or breakdown, I felt a strange, calming certainty. I had done the right thing. Around midnight I finally checked my phone. Dozens of missed calls from Kyle, her family, and various wedding guests. Text messages ranged from Kyle's frantic, "Call me right now," to her mother's coldly furious, "You've made a complete fool of yourself and hurt my daughter irreparably." But there were supportive messages too. "Ryan, proud of you, bro. That took serious guts. I'm here whenever you need me." My parents, "We're so sorry, son. We love you and support your decision. Come home if you need to." Even Alex and other friends, "That was intense but 100% justified. Let us know if you need anything." The most surprising message came from Madison, Kevin's girlfriend. "I understand more than you know. Call if you want to talk." I responded only to Ryan and my parents, letting them know I was safe and would be in touch tomorrow. Then I turned off my phone completely, took a long shower, and collapsed into dreamless sleep wearing the hotel bathrobe. Morning brought clarity and the practical matters of unwinding a marriage that had barely begun. My first call was to a lawyer friend who referred me to a colleague specializing in family law. "You'll want an annulment, not a divorce," he advised. "Given the circumstances and the extremely short duration, it should be straightforward." Kyle's messages had evolved overnight from anger to manipulation. "I can't believe you would humiliate me like this." Then, "Please come home so we can talk about this rationally." And finally, "I'll make changes, I promise." Kevin agrees he needs to step back. That last one almost made me laugh. Even her promise to prioritize our marriage included Kevin's approval of the concept. I didn't return to our apartment for 3 days, sending Ryan instead to collect essential items. According to him, Kyle had barricaded herself inside with Kevin and her mother, all three of them attempting to intercept him with alternating tactics of guilt, legal threats, and tearful pleas for reconciliation. "Kevin tried to tell me you had a psychotic break and needed psychiatric intervention," Ryan reported, handing over a duffel bag of my clothes and toiletries. "Then Diana threatened to sue you for wedding costs. It's a circus over there." The annulment proceedings began the following week. I stayed with my parents temporarily, working remotely and trying to establish a new normal. Kyle initially contested the annulment, insisting we needed counseling instead, but when my lawyer presented the grounds, fraud based on misrepresentation of the fundamental nature of our relationship, she reluctantly agreed rather than have the details aired in court. The financial untangling was messy. Wedding costs had been split between our families, with Kyle's parents covering the larger portion, a fact Diana repeatedly weaponized in angry emails. I offered to reimburse my share, which only seemed to infuriate her more, as though my willingness to pay undermined her narrative of me as an unstable, cruel deserter. Social media became a battlefield I refused to enter. Kyle posted a carefully curated version of events, casting herself as the abandoned bride blindsided by an uncaring groom. Mutual friends reported that Kevin was actively reaching out to everyone in our circle, sharing his own embellished account that painted me as jealous, controlling, and unreasonable. I maintained digital silence, declining to engage in the public mudslinging. This approach frustrated Kyle and her family, who seemed to crave the drama of a public fight. When their provocations yielded no response, the posts gradually tapered off. The most difficult aspect wasn't the legal or financial complications, but the emotional aftermath of ending a relationship I genuinely believed would last forever. Despite the clarity of my decision, I struggled with grief for what might have been, for the Kyle I thought I knew, for the future we planned together. My parents suggested therapy, and it proved invaluable. Dr. Simmons, a compassionate but no-nonsense psychologist, helped me understand that my relationship with Kyle had contained elements of what she called emotional triangulation from the beginning. "In healthy relationships," she explained, "two people form a primary bond. Others, friends, family, even children, are important but secondary to that core partnership. What you've described is a triangle where Kyle and Kevin maintained the primary bond, with you intentionally positioned as an outsider. Could it have worked if I just accepted that dynamic?" I asked during one session. Dr. Simmons regarded me seriously. "Would you have been happy as an accessory in your own marriage? Perpetually third in priority?" Put that way, the answer was obvious. Friends proved essential to my recovery. Alex organized weekly poker nights to keep me socially engaged. Ryan and his wife Emma regularly invited me for dinner, providing normal human interaction when I was tempted to isolate. My college roommate Mark, who'd introduced me to Kyle, reached out with particular concern. "I feel responsible," he admitted over beers one evening, 6 weeks after the wedding disaster. "I introduced you to her without realizing." "You couldn't have known," I assured him. "I lived with her for 3 years and missed it, or chose not to see it." The hardest blow came 3 months after the wedding, when I discovered through mutual friends that Kyle and Kevin had made an offer on a duplex, a 2-family house they planned to share, with Kyle living in one unit and Kevin and Madison in the other. It was exactly the arrangement they'd been planning behind my back, just without me in the picture. Madison confirmed this when she unexpectedly called me. "I'm leaving Kevin," she said without preamble. "I wanted you to hear it from me since you're basically the only person who might understand." We met for coffee, and she shared her side of the twins' dynamic, how Kevin constantly canceled plans to address Kyle's emergencies, how their relationship always took precedence over his relationship with Madison, how she'd been expected to accept a subordinate role just as I had. "Watching what happened at your wedding was like seeing my future flash before my eyes," she admitted. "I realized I couldn't do it. So, thank you in a way." Her words were oddly validating. I wasn't crazy or unreasonable. Someone else had seen exactly what I had seen. The holidays were difficult, my first Thanksgiving and Christmas alone after years of planning for a shared future. But they also brought unexpected gifts, the freedom to choose my own traditions, to spend time with my family without negotiating with Kyle and Kevin, to rediscover aspects of myself that had been gradually suppressed in my attempt to fit into their dynamic. When the annulment was finally granted, 5 months after the wedding I felt no triumph or vindication, just quiet relief and readiness to move forward. That evening, I deleted the last photos of Kyle from my phone, canceled the email alerts I'd set up for messages from her or her family, and symbolically closed that chapter of my life. I had survived what felt like a public execution of my relationship, emerged with my self-respect intact, and learned crucial lessons about what I truly wanted, and deserved, in a partnership. The pain had been real, but so was the growth that followed. As one particularly difficult year came to a close, I realized that ending my marriage at the wedding reception wasn't the disaster it had initially seemed. It was the first step toward reclaiming my life. 1 year after what my friends now jokingly call the cake rebellion, I sat across from my therapist during what we'd agreed would be our final regular session. "So, Trevor," Dr. Simmons said with her characteristic directness, "how would you say you're doing now, compared to when you first came to see me?" I considered the question carefully. A year ago, I was shell-shocked. I felt like a failure for not making my marriage work, even though intellectually I knew walking away was the right decision. Now, I'm actually grateful for what happened. "Grateful?" she echoed, inviting elaboration. "If Kyle had compromised just a little more, if she'd let me cut that cake with her, I might have stayed. I'd probably be living in that house near Kevin right now, slowly watching my identity and needs get sidelined until I barely recognized myself." I shook my head at the thought. Instead, I'm building a life that actually reflects who I am and what I want. And I was. After 6 months in my parents' guest room, I'd found a downtown loft that I furnished entirely to my own taste, no compromises, no consulting anyone else's preferences. I'd accepted a promotion at work that would have been impossible had I moved to the suburbs as Kyle and her family had planned. I'd reconnected with old friends and made new ones, expanding my social circle beyond the narrow bounds it had gradually assumed during my relationship with Kyle. Most surprisingly, I'd begun dating again, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Jessica, a graphic designer I'd met through a rock climbing gym, another new interest, approached relationships with the same directness and healthy independence I now valued. Our connection was strong but not consuming, passionate but not desperate, close but not codependent. Life had moved forward in unexpected ways, not despite the wedding disaster, but because of it. 2 weeks after that final therapy session, fate threw me a curveball. I was having dinner with Jessica at a new restaurant downtown when I spotted them, Kyle and Kevin, seated at a corner table, heads close together in familiar conspiracy. My stomach tightened instinctively, but the panic I might have expected didn't materialize. Jessica noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" I nodded toward their table. "My ex-wife and her twin brother." Her eyes widened slightly. She knew the story. "Want to leave?" "Actually, no," I realized with some surprise. "I'm fine." We continued our meal, and I was genuinely unbothered by their presence. When Kyle finally noticed me on her way to the restroom, she froze momentarily, then approached our table with visible hesitation. "Trevor," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "It's been a while." "It has," I agreed pleasantly. "Kyle, this is Jessica." "Jessica, this is Kyle." They exchanged polite greetings, the awkwardness palpable but manageable. Kyle glanced back at Kevin, who was watching our interaction like a hawk. "So," she said, fidgeting with her purse strap, "how have you been?" "I'm doing well," I replied honestly. "Very well, actually." "How about you?" "Good." "Great, really." "Kevin and I bought that duplex in Lexington. He and Madison broke up, so he's living alone in his half for now, but we're right next door to each other, just like we always talked about." There it was, confirmation of exactly what I'd suspected and feared during our relationship. But instead of pain, I felt only confirmation that I'd made the right choice. "I'm glad you're happy," I said, and meant it. Kyle deserved happiness, just as I did. We simply couldn't have found it together. After a few more minutes of stilted conversation, she returned to her table. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "So that's the infamous Kyle." "That's her." "And you're really okay?" I reached across the table to take her hand. "More than okay. I feel nothing but relief." It was true. Seeing Kyle with Kevin, so obviously living exactly the life they had always intended, with or without my participation, I felt no jealousy or regret, only gratitude for my narrow escape. In the months that followed, I occasionally heard updates about Kyle through our dwindling circle of mutual friends. Kevin had moved his interior design business into her half of the duplex. They'd bought a vacation cottage that they shared. Kyle's mother had purchased the property next door to them and was renovating it for her retirement. The family unit had contracted protectively around itself, exactly as it always had. Madison reached out occasionally too. She'd moved to Chicago for a fresh start and was thriving, another refugee from the twins' closed system who'd found happiness outside its confines. Looking back from the perspective of time and healing, I could recognize the red flags that had been present from the beginning, Kyle checking with Kevin before making any decision. Kevin having a key to our apartment without discussion. Kyle positioning me as an outsider in family gatherings rather than bringing me into the fold. The constant triangulation where my relationship with my own wife was mediated through her relationship with her twin. These weren't just quirks or family closeness. They were warnings of a fundamental incompatibility in how we viewed marriage. Kyle had never intended to form a primary bond with me that superseded other relationships. She had wanted to maintain her core identity as Kevin's twin while adding a husband as a supplementary figure. The wedding cake incident hadn't created our problems, it had merely brought them into unavoidable focus. In that moment of clarity, with Kevin holding the knife that should have been in our hands together, I'd seen our entire future laid out before me. A lifetime of birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, and milestones where I would be expected to step aside for Kevin's special bond with my wife. Children who would be raised with the understanding that Uncle Kevin's opinion mattered more than Dad's. A marriage where I would never truly be my wife's partner, but rather an addition to a pre-existing, inviolable relationship. Walking away hadn't been a reaction to a single slight or a momentary anger. It had been an act of self-preservation and self-respect. The most valuable lesson I learned from my almost marriage was about boundaries, recognizing them, establishing them, and maintaining them even when it's difficult. I learned that love isn't enough if it doesn't come with respect. I learned that compromising on fundamental needs isn't compromise at all, it's surrender. Most importantly, I learned that being alone is far better than being with someone who makes you feel alone. If you're watching this and something in my story resonates with your own situation, trust your instincts. Pay attention to red flags, even when they're disguised as family loyalty or traditions. Remember that healthy relationships enhance your identity rather than diminishing it. And know that sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do, for yourself and ultimately for the other person, is to walk away. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision like ending a relationship that others didn't understand? How did you handle the aftermath? Did you also find that what seemed like an ending was actually a beginning? Like this video if my story connected with you, subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose yourself sometimes. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you deserve to be someone's first choice, not their afterthought.